What the hell is wrong with you? The only thing that's ever been consistent in my life is that question. Welcome to the ADHD Untangled podcast. My name is Rosie Turner and I'm an accredited ADHD coach, yoga and Pilates instructor. But ultimately, I'm just a human being who knows what it feels like to live with ADHD. And after having 8 failed driving tests, impulsive decisions to get married and then divorce before the age of 27, and having an inability to handle any form of rejection, I've decided to dedicate my life to supporting the ADHD community. And this podcast will cover the 2 things that I love to talk about most: movement and ADHD. You will hear real life stories from real people living with ADHD. You will get advice from wellness industry and ADHD experts. So what are you waiting for? Let's get untangled and show the world what we are made of. Welcome.
Thank you.
Who the hell are you and what is your life's mission?
So my name's Josie, officially Dr. Josephine Perry, but I prefer Josie. So I am a sports psychologist. I've been a sports psychologist for 12 years now. I switched. I used to work in the city in a corporate job as a communications director. But in 2013, I went to Australia to do Ironman Melbourne. And I was standing on the beach in Frankston, which is the beach where they do the swim from, and the waves were utterly terrifying. And even my husband was a bit nervous, and he's a proper Aussie, so he could do this stuff, but it was terrifying to me. And the guy in the tannoy said, "You can't control those waves. You can control how you feel about them." And it was my little light bulb moment going, oh yeah, if I think differently about sport, I could be better at it. And I'm not really a sporty, but I don't think of myself still as someone that's particularly sporty. So it was suddenly like, I could use my brain here. And I came back to the UK, I really started looking into sports psychology, left my job. And then I discovered you have to do a year's conversion course in psychology and then a master's in sport and exercise psychology. And then 3 years of supervised practice to actually be fully qualified. So I've gone through all of that. And I now specialize in working with athletes who get very high levels of performance anxiety. So they get really, really anxious before their performances, or they get very, very angry and stressed if something goes wrong and they tend to blow up. So I'm working with those athletes to be able to manage that better so that they can actually enjoy their sport much better. When they're able to enjoy it, they tend to perform better.
I love all of this. And first and foremost, I love your story around choosing more meaningful work, because this is a lot of the work that I do with my clients with ADHD, basically, is like trying to, you know, after years of masking and being in, especially it seems to be work related, you know, struggles in a sense that they just feel like they've masked and done certain careers because they felt they had to and they didn't believe in themselves. So always so amazing to hear stories about people that have just, you know, quit on the 9 to 5 to go and follow their passions and do some amazing work like you have. So thanks for sharing that. And the athletes that you described, how many of those do you think might be ADHD? The ones that want more and keep, you know, beating themselves up for not doing enough, basically?
Well, that was the reason I wrote the book, because for the last 6-7 years, I guess I've been working very much with highly intelligent perfectionists. So highly intelligent perfectionists tend to get very high levels of performance anxiety, and they tend to have a freeze response when they're trying to do something outside of their comfort zone. And I was working with these athletes and realizing that more and more of them were saying that they'd either had an ADHD diagnosis or were spotting more and more traits showing up that might suggest that if they went for one, they would be given one. And so I wanted to write a book, or I wanted to find a book that I could give to them and say, here, this might help you. See if you recognize lots of these traits, see how they're showing up for you in your sport. And for myself, I wanted some tools to be able to very effectively go, this is how we'll help you. And there was no book out there. And actually, even when you start looking at the academic literature, there's a huge amount of literature showing how exercise and sport can be incredibly helpful if you have ADHD. But there's nothing on saying how to be better in sport with ADHD. So even in the book itself, that there's 3 chapters that are all different techniques and tools you can use, but they're all from my experience of working with athletes and seeing what works for them, rather than having kind of very strong evidence base behind them, because there is just no research in that area yet.
Yeah, I was just saying to you, wasn't I, before recording, is I had the same issue. I was looking to see if there was any books around athletes and ADHD, and I couldn't find anything that had as much information, and all the topics that you've covered in here is amazing. So you definitely are like a first to be out here talking about this, and I think it's so needed. And I love that you've mentioned about, getting better in sport with ADHD, because one of the challenges I have with teenage clients is a lot of them will be good in school at subjects such as PE being one of the most popular ones, or food technology. But often they're not encouraged to learn how to get better in that place of strength at school. It's more about, oh, we need you to get better in your place of struggle, like maths or whatever it is they're struggling with. And I think books like this could really change that too. And maybe you need to do another teenager book for for ADHD and sport after this. Not giving you more books to write, but
Thanks. You are spot on. There were, not about writing more books, my husband would go crazy. But there's a real issue with, the way I guess I like to think about different brains, and I really dislike the fact that ADHD is talking about a disorder. I would love us to talk much more about it being a difference. And I think when we start to think about differences in brains, one of the big things we can use from a sporting perspective is thinking about motivation. So a neurotypical brain is, our motivation will come from importance. Is something important? Are there consequences if we don't do it? Is there a deadline at some point in the future? An autistic brain tends to really need safety, and an ADHD brain needs interest. So it's like, to get someone, an athlete who's got ADHD, to do something really well, there needs to be some interest there. There needs to be challenge. There needs to be novelty. There needs to be kind of immediate outcomes required. And so what I find, and particularly with a lot of athletes I interviewed for the book, was that they really struggled at school until they were 16, because they're doing a whole wide range of probably 10 subjects. They really, really disliked that. But as soon as they got to A-level, they loved it, because they could focus on things that actually they were interested in. And that hyper focus.
They had their own agency, didn't they? Then
totally, yeah. They've got autonomy. They were able to focus on things they were interested in. And actually, I think 3 of the people out of the 9 I interviewed for the book are now doing PhDs. So once you're allowed to focus on something that you're genuinely interested in, you're going to be amazing at it. Which is why I think there are so many athletes who have ADHD. Because one of the stats I read in researching the book was that by the age of 10, if you have hyperactive ADHD, you will have been told off 20,000 times more than someone who's neurotypical, right? So if you're going to school every day and you're just getting told off constantly for moving, for fidgeting, for looking like you're not listening, for wiggling on your chair, for struggling with some of the transitions, you're going to get pretty despondent. If you then get to go out and do sport or PE, and you've got someone that's actually praising you for the fact that you're constantly moving, and that you've got that hyperactivity, and you're probably focused on it because you enjoy it, you're going to get good at that really quickly, because you're absolutely going to hyper-focus. You're going to build up your self-esteem. You're going to have coaches that are giving you extra tuition on it. It's going to become your thing. And you suddenly develop an area where you're strong. And that's really powerful for somebody.
So powerful. And it does take that one person, that one teacher, that one, I don't know, someone in their life, a coach outside of school, to just see something in them that they've got something that they're good at and could, the potential to even be even better at, to really big them up. And that stat always, breaks my heart when I hear that. And I think that's why I always say the biggest struggle that we have as a community is the lack of self-belief, because of, not understanding why we were different. If we haven't had that opportunity where we've been able to find what it is that we're good at, or it hasn't been celebrated or be seen as important, then that can have such detrimental impacts on someone's life. And we're not, there's such a fine line between them becoming the athlete, the entrepreneur, or going into the prison justice system. And that's the thing. Sometimes they don't get to that sixth form place to choose what it is they love. And I think this is why this is so important, and to have these conversations.
That's why I want sport to be the safe place. Because if
Yeah.
sport is a place you feel you're going to thrive and people get you and you get to be yourself without loads of criticism and judgment, then you thrive in that world and you don't go down bad. Like the impulsivity and the risk taking can be used in a good way in sport. Whereas
Definitely.
it's not going to be used in a good way in other parts of life. So one of the things I will often talk about with coaches, and I did a coaching conference last week, and I was like, if you take one thing away from today, it's remember the strengths. Because if you can celebrate everybody's strengths, you will get more out of them on a football pitch or a rugby pitch or a cross-country course. And you will make them feel good. So you'll get far more dedication to what you're doing from those athletes.
Most definitely. And I really love the way you described as well that what an ADHD brain needs and an autistic brain. I've got both, and I can relate to that so much. And that actually can be really difficult to manage. I think, like, trying to have, it's like one part of me wants safety, the other part wants like interest and risk taking. So it's really, even just explaining that to sports coaches and things like that, that's what their brain will be looking for, is just a game changer, isn't it? Because how can you use certain language or routines or whatever it is to, support that athlete's differences and get the best out of them.
Yeah, and what I would love to get to a point is where we're not necessarily using labels for anybody. We're just accepting that we all have lots and lots of individual differences. How do we create a sporting environment that works for as many of those differences as possible so that everybody gets to thrive? So it was interesting at a coaching conference, somebody said, I don't really know what to do, because if you're telling me I can't tell off the ADHD athletes for showing up late, then what does that say to everybody else? And I was like, why do you need to tell them off for showing up late? It's like, well, they're late. And it's like, yeah, but it doesn't change anything, does it? They're not suddenly going to lose their time blindness because they got yelled at by a coach. They're still going to be late, because or they're going to turn up on time but be horrifically anxious because of the energy it took to show up on time. Like,
So true.
there'll be their own consequences. If they're late, they have to do the warm up on their own, which always feels a bit awkward, or they miss out on training time, which means they don't get as good as they want to be. Like, there's usually natural consequences that don't require a coach to yell at somebody, and everybody benefits from that.
And that's the thing. I think, I always say that with like ADHD, supporting ADHD it's just a vehicle I use to support environments have individuality. But I think, like you say, it enables all the stuff that you're talking about in your book will support everybody within the sports industry if we make these adaptations to accept difference. It's not just for people with ADHD. And I think that's what's important. It's just give us a great moment to talk about this, I think, with the labels being given out and diagnosis on the rise, or the awareness on the rise.
And I mean, obviously it's nice as an author for people to buy your books, but I have been surprised by how many coaches and some of the organisations, the national governing bodies, the big sports schools, buying dozens and dozens of copies for all of their coaches so that they can really start to understand how to adapt. And even in like community coaches where they're like, I've got 100 kids on a Saturday morning. How am I supposed to adapt for the 4 or 5 that have got ADHD? And it's like, well, one, you'll have way more than that who do. But 2, there are 20 tips that I give to coaches when I'm doing a workshop on it that will work for everybody. So actually, it just helps you become a better coach when you are creating your sessions in a way that support those athletes with ADHD.
So true. What do you put the stats at for how many athletes have ADHD? What do you think? Because again, this research isn't there, is it really?
No one knows. And I mean, the last stats I saw in the UK were that there were 550,000 people waiting for diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to a clinician recently who said something about they've got 11,000 on the waiting list. And I was like, oh, in the UK? She went, no, in my part of Birmingham.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, okay. And that was just in a paediatrics, and that was just children. So we know we don't have the right stats. In sports, we're obviously we don't have stats either. There are some universities, Manchester Met and King's College, are now setting up much better groups to look at ADHD specifically in sport. So over time, we will start to get better figures. What we can look at is where we have therapeutic use exemptions, and particularly in the US. So there has been some research where they've looked at teams in the US to see how many people in that team have a therapeutic use exemption for ADHD medication, because you can't take ADHD meds in sport without a therapeutic use exemption. So it has to have
this
been
is what
signed
someone was
off.
talking about. Yeah.
So
is it quite
yeah,
difficult to get?
yeah, the levels to be able to get the medication as an athlete can be higher, because they're stimulants. So other people who don't need them would benefit from their sports elements, might well benefit from being on them. So for a good reason, they are regulated, controlled drugs. So you need a therapeutic use exemption in order to take them. So they have looked in some sports to see at least 20-30% of athletes in that sport have a therapeutic use exemption for medication. And we also know that only about 60% of people who are diagnosed do take medication. So some athletes won't want to take it because they think it kind of ruins their flow of the feel of what they're doing. So they purposely choose to. Some can't because it can increase resting heart rate. It can raise your body temperature. So if you're competing in certain conditions, that could be dangerous. In some sports, you can't take the medications into certain countries, or you're limited with how much.
Of course,
So
I didn't even think about that.
one of the girls in the book plays professional cricket, and they had a 6-week cricket tour to somewhere in the Middle East, but you could only take 28 days worth of medication. So she had to choose which days she was going to take her medication. And the other big issue is because they're a stimulant, you are also more likely to reduce your appetite. And the big issue then is that athletes are not fueling their sport effectively. We know that those with ADHD are more likely to get an eating disorder. So if you've already got a predisposition to an eating disorder, particularly if autism is thrown into the mix as well, there's a much higher chance of eating disorders. And then you give someone medication, that means they're not going to even think about eating for 8 hours in the day. And we're pushing them to go and work 2,000 calories on a football pitch for a couple of hours. You've got a recipe for disaster. So a lot of athletes don't want to take meds. So actually we think the levels are going to be significantly higher in sport.
Definitely. I'm so glad that we got onto this because, as I said to you, I'm really passionate about this topic. When you lose your period, I think in sports world it's called REDS, basically. So let's just call it that.
Yeah. So in the sports world, we call it RED-S, which stands for relative energy deficiency in sport and dance. I don't know why the D never got in there. But yes, it used to be known actually as female athlete triad. So it was the idea that you stepped up the amount of training you were doing, which then meant you were underfueling it. And then your body hasn't got the energy it needs to function fully. And so it protects itself by stopping your period. Because if you don't have a period, you can't get pregnant, and it would be dangerous for you to get pregnant. It actually, they changed the name because boys get it too. And we do see in a number
how does theirs
of sports. So girls will notice when their period stops or they get a stress fracture. Those are the first two signs. Boys don't get their morning erection, and they also get stress fractures. So those are the two signs that I will ask any athlete that comes to work with me, because particularly in endurance sports or sports where your body is very much on display, like gymnastics, trampolining, or where your weight is discussed. So things like rowing, where you have to be a certain weight to fit in certain boats and those kind of things. Any of those sports, disordered eating is much, much higher.
And then you shove ADHD in the mix, which is, as we said, we know it's huge for us to suffer with, all different types of eating disorders. But again, this is a big conversation that needs to be had. And actually something, if you've got awareness that you've got an athlete that has ADHD or autism, something that to look out for quite soon, and be aware of. Because I think as well, it's like a numbers thing, isn't it? We can be quite I remember just being very, once given a number or being told to cut out food groups, very literal with that and being very routine, and then the same, do you know what I think it was as well? I don't know how it works with athletes, but obviously I had just got a watch one day, one of these Apple Watch things. And it was once I could count and see numbers like calories, steps, it just changed everything. It was all about the numbers. And I didn't even know I had autism or ADHD then, but like it all makes sense. And if you're an athlete and you're always trying to hit targets or times, or I can imagine if you've got ADHD and autism, how dangerous that could be, actually.
Totally. We know that about 75% of girls that get anorexia are also autistic. So,
wow, that's a huge stat.
It is. So ideally, earlier identification can be very helpful because it means you can watch out for that very, very carefully. The more coaches realize the impact of their words, the better. So on a lovely perspective, there's an activity I do with all my athletes called Confidence Jar, where we're looking at their strengths and their skills and setbacks they've overcome and difficult things they've done to really help them see how brilliant they are and build up their confidence.
I love that. Confidence jar, did you say?
Yep. Yeah. But within it, what we will also do is ask them for things other people have said about them that made them feel good. And most people can't remember any, because our brain's designed to be negative because its job is to keep us alive and safe. So we forget all the good stuff and we focus on the negatives. So I try and get people to keep a list of good, positive compliments they've had from people so that they start to be able to build up that good side too. But when I do that, if an athlete can remember one thing that's good that's been said about them, it is always from their coach. They are pretty much always able to say, my coach says this. So coaches are incredibly powerful with their athletes. We remember the good stuff a coach has said about us. We kind of hold on for it as a safety comfort. So coaches' words are powerful. And whilst that can be used brilliantly, just a flippant word you haven't really thought about could be so negative. So simply looking at someone across a field and going, they've put on a bit of weight, haven't they? Oh, she's a bit too big to do this. The athlete standing next to you has internalized that. Yeah. And so when I've talked, and when I've talked to athletes who've had eating disorders, it is usually one comment by a coach that has started it. So if you lost a couple of kilos, you'd be so much faster. That's all it takes. Or even, I think you should probably go up a size in a leotard. Like just a tiny thing at the wrong time can be really, really destructive for people. So it's a big issue to put on coaches because they're having to work with somebody all the time and think about their language that they use so that they don't risk anything, particularly with, say, an autistic brain or somebody who's very intelligent, got high levels of anxiety, high levels of sensitivity. And usually the other thing that's said about girls with eating disorders is they're really kind. So many parents who phone me to ask to work with their daughters, they'll talk about their eating disorder, but she's just so kind that it's almost like another trait that feeds into it of that kind of the people pleasing and the
I was going to say that people pleasing,
wanting to be the best you can be, but it also means you want to make yourself smaller so other people can be bigger. And all of that feeds into that eating disorder side, which is then so destructive for being able to do anything, particularly being able to be good at sport.
Yeah, but you're right. It is quite challenging, isn't it? Because especially if you've been a coach for a long time, because as well, not, people don't have the intention to, be hurtful, and it's just a way of maybe how they was coached or what have you, in the past. So it is quite a difficult one to get people to it's starting to bring awareness to it and then practicing what it is they know now, isn't it? Sorry to interrupt, but I really need your help. If you are a sports or wellness professional, maybe a yoga, Pilates teacher, or a sports coach to the athletes, then I'd love you to join my mission to get more ADHDers moving towards their goals. And it's no secret that I love what I do, but I cannot do this shit alone. So that's why I've created the ADHD Movement Academy, a space that provides professionals like you with certified ADHD trainings that can give you what it is you need to support this incredible community. And they really are incredible. And because we don't do surface level chit chat, this training goes way beyond the basics of what ADHD is. We go way deeper than that. You will hear from 7 industry experts, from hormones with Adele Wimsett, trauma with Dr. Winford Dorr, and ADHD and sport with none other than world champion athlete Liam Harrison. Because when you really get ADHD, you don't have to lower the bar. You just have to change how people reach it. So if you're ready to support this incredible community and create a more meaningful career for yourself, then head over to untangledco.com and lead this movement with a difference. Rejection sensitive dysphoria. Now, I feel like this could be a big game changer when people, a lot of people don't know about it. It is more commonly known now, but I think it's still, like, I mention it to people daily who have never heard of it still. How does that present in an athlete with ADHD,
difficultly,
do you think? Yes.
Because I think of it as putting a negative filter on what's said to you. So it's almost like everything has to go through a bit of a negative filter before you're going to stick on it. And take ballet, for example, and I work a lot in ballet. If you want to be a good ballet dancer, actually what you want is corrections from your teacher. So some people will see the amount of corrections they get as how high up the scale they are. Corrections means that a ballet teacher thinks you're worth spending their time on you. So the kids that get the most corrections come out of the class thinking, like, I'm great, this is brilliant. Somebody thinks I'm worth spending their time on. But not if you've got rejection sensitivity. Rejection sensitivity means that teacher hates me. They think I'm going to fail.
Yeah.
Doesn't. It's just part of the process. But even the name corrections can obviously bring up some difficult feelings for people.
Even
right?
me now, I'm like, oh God.
I know.
I wonder how many people as well, like, in the past have not gone on to do sport that are great at because of RSD. Or I suppose there's 2 ways that people can respond to it. I've always found that I can respond to it in 2 ways anyway. It's either like you shrink yourself and you back off from what it is you was going to do, and you think, right, I'm not going to go there because it's too risky, it's too vulnerable. Or like you mentioned a minute ago, it's that people pleasing and the overachiever mask. And I feel like the overachiever mask in athletes must be huge. And I call them, I've put it here, the can't stop, won't stop kind of ADHD. And if they've got that RSD and say they're in sports, because obviously it's like win or lose, isn't it? How do they respond to losing their game when they've got RSD? Because I can't imagine, and especially if it's quite public.
We spend a lot of time working on stopping trying to win.
Right, good. Yeah, let go of the outcome.
Because your threat system is triggered by outcomes, and especially black and white ones, and particularly metrics that are very easy to measure. Did we win? Did I get a new PB? Did I go faster? So it's very easy to measure those, but that will trigger your threat system very quickly, particularly if you have a mono identity around your sport. So not related to ADHD
what does that
at all,
mean?
but mono identity, where you are your sport. You are what you do.
Unhealthy relationship between attachment
yeah,
to your sport.
when it matters too much. And when you connect your self-identity with your sport. So there was an article in the Times this weekend about Emma Raducanu going to uni to study art. I was like, awesome. Because this poor girl, she finished school 6 years ago with her A-levels, and now everybody knows her as Emma Raducanu, the tennis player. They just go in the same sentence. That gives you a very strong mono identity. And it means every single tennis match is going to start to feel threatening to you. What if I'm not brilliant? What if I don't win? I failed. And then
This is who I am. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not just then I failed and I'm not a good tennis player. It's not I failed, I'm not a good tennis player. I'm not a good person. So it feels very, very triggering to you. It's horrible. Whereas if we start to really focus on the inputs to our sport, that's so much easier. So if we're focused on the attitudes we have, the behaviors we display, the tasks that we follow, the energy or the effort levels we put in, it's much, much easier.
Yeah, focusing on the like, what's happening now instead of like, what you can't control, because ultimately you can only control what you're doing right now and what you're putting in and enjoying it. And I do think that's the thing with ADHD. I often say, like, there's so many strengths that come from it, but I think the danger we have, especially if you are a can't stop, won't stop kind, is it can take the fun out of the things you love. because it becomes so, driven by more.
Yeah,
If we're
and
not
that's the
careful,
perfectionism. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, as part of launching the book, I've been doing some kind of YouTube chats with different practitioners around the world, and interviewed quite a few from Australia for some reason. They're really on it in Australia.
I
And
know they are. I hear from
they
people in
really
Australia all
are.
the time, and I'm like, wow, they're so on
Yes.
it.
And yeah, one of the guys was like, I just think now of perfectionism as being an ADHD trait, because
Yeah.
setting that bar high and doing whatever it takes to reach it, it will get you far in sport, but you won't enjoy it because you've set a bar here, you're working towards it. As soon as you get close, you don't sit back and think, cool, I'm awesome. You just think, oh, I need to raise the bar. And there's always going to be this gap
before you've
between
even got to the bar.
Yeah, totally.
You just get so close to it and you're like, right, what next? I need to do more.
Yep, totally. So you don't end up enjoying the process of it.
No.
Yes, when you're 80 and you look back, you'd be like, damn it, I was awesome. But at the moment, you won't see it.
No. Is that easy? Have you had a lot of success with that with ADHD clients?
Yeah, we get very specific. So I will give people, or we'll work together to create 10 inputs to the sport they're about to do that they can measure themselves out of 10 afterwards. So instead of measuring themselves by did they win or lose or what was the score, they give themselves a percentage of how well they did on their inputs.
Can you give me an example? What inputs would say 3 examples of what an input is?
Yeah. So say I was going to, triathlon's still my sport. So say I was doing triathlon at the weekend. Mm-hmm. One input might be to do my pre-race routine properly. Another input might be to have high elbows in the swim. They're very specific task-based things. And another input might be to handle my threat system well on the run if somebody overtakes me.
Love it. And so it's very similar to because I do weekly wins. So that's small wins, of the week to get, like you say, because we have a stronger negative bias, but also breaking it down. So for an ADHD brain, for those that might not know this, like coaches and stuff, to break stuff down and have those little rewards along the way is so great, like you said, because it's the interest, isn't it? And it's the dopamine they get in from those steps along the way, instead of having to have this just one big dopamine goal that could be taken away from them at any time, basically.
Yeah. I think that dopamine element's really interesting to think about when it comes to what different sports athletes choose to do. So I'm often asked I'm often asked if it's like, are they better off doing individual sports or team sports? Or are there certain ones that are designed? Because of that interest-based motivation, I'd say the best sport is whatever interests you, the thing that gives you the hyper focus and you're going to work towards. There are some sports that I think can be harder. Things like swimming are tricky in that there are lots of sensory issues when you're swimming, particularly if you're in a lane with lots of other people that some athletes struggle with. And the sleep thing. So if you're one of the 70% of ADHDers who struggle with sleep, then getting up at 5:30 in the morning to do all your swim sets for the week is going to be really, really hard because you're just going to be constantly tired. So and swimming, I'm a swimmer, so I can say this with love for it, but it can be really boring. Yeah. If you're swimming, and some of the proper swimmers,
I get bored of swimming quite quickly.
Yeah, the proper swimmers, they're doing like 15, 20 hours a week. And you're just going up and down a lane. You're doing a lot of drills. You're doing a lot of miles. It's not the most, and all you can see is a black line on the bottom of the water, right? It's not the most exciting sport.
So do you think less ADHDers are doing that sport, out of a guess?
What I tended to find was people did it when they were younger. They got good at it because that hyper focus means you do all of that over and over again. You get beautifully good at it. You can feel the pattern and the routines, but they tended to get bored of it and find something else. So what I do see with lots of athletes with ADHD is that they've switched sports quite a lot.
That does not surprise me.
So yes, they've usually been good at quite a number when younger. They've tended to specialize, as we suggest, around kind of 14, 15 of like, this is my sport. But actually early 20s, they will often shift again into something else.
Wow. That is so interesting, because that's the thing with, when you think about athletes, you do a bit like what you're told about in the corporate world. I was always told the same thing, like, you need to do one thing and get good at it. And I'm always challenging that. and saying like, yes, but actually, especially the world we live in where everything changes so much, you know, can we stop having negative connotations for people that want to change it up and do something else? Because, you know, quitting isn't always for losers, and actually maybe it's just not wanting to have mediocrity, you know, they want to do something else and have fun and enjoy what it is they're doing. So do you think that's appreciated in the world of sport, or do you think that can be quite difficult for people to want to move on if they have a gut feeling it's not for them anymore?
Elite level, that is often really celebrated. So it used to be that the UK Sport Institute would send people along to the track, and they would look at the 100-meter runners that were good, but not quite going to get to Olympic level. And then they would offer them places in like bobsleigh. So you can purposely transfer athletes who have got some skills you really need and some inbuilt power and dedication, and switch them over to another sport where you don't have
I
the
love
numbers.
that.
Because who thinks of growing up and being a bobslayer? But you can use them really effectively. So, and there are very specific programs now they have at elite level in the UK of looking at transitions, of looking at, and there's some brilliant examples of athletes who've done well in one sport and switched to another. And you can use those skills. Someone like, and I've no idea about her neurodiversity status, but someone like Dame Sarah Story was a phenomenal swimmer. She went to a couple of her Paralympic Games as a swimmer, and she switched to cycling. She don't feel like they've got the closest relationship, but her mindset and her approach is phenomenal. And so she was just able to take that mindset and approach from her swimming and put it into her cycling, where she's been, I think she's the most successful female Paralympian ever. When I've interviewed her for things and I've tried to work out how many medals she's got across World, European and Paralympics, we've given up because it's in the 80s or something. She's amazing. And she's just, even if the physicality isn't necessarily similar across sports, she's been brilliant at taking that mentality and using it.
Isn't that a great example of not having, you know, people put into boxes, and what you could do if you look at what they can do and just say, right, they're really good at this, like even if it's their mindset or whatever it is, how about we give it a go, and they could try this thing out that they seem to enjoy, or whatever it is. Like, that is such a great example that could be replicated everywhere in life if we just looked at what people can do.
One of the athletes in the book started off as a shot putter, and she's now a rugby player. So she went from very...
What's her name?
I didn't give out any names in the book. I just used kind of headline names.
You do too? Okay, we're not allowed to say.
They were just... I mean, they were all amazing. I was so privileged to be able to talk to them. But some of them were talking about kind of difficulties they'd had with certain coaches at clubs and how life had been a bit harder. Some of them talked about things like they felt like they needed to disclose their ADHD to a coach, which felt sad in the first place, that you felt like it was something you had to go and like talk about. And they'd get up all that courage to go and talk to a coach. You just kind of go, oh, okay. Nothing ever changed anyway. So I wanted to give them some anonymity. We used their first names so that they could talk a little bit more openly and honestly about some of the struggles that they'd had.
Do you know what? We had a lady called Cara on here, and she was mentioning that she had some mental health struggles as an athlete, you know, years ago when she was like practicing. And she said that, you know, some of the coaches and stuff were calling her like the mad one, and there was a lot of like stigma around her coming out with bipolar and then obviously an ADHD diagnosis. Do you think there is still a lot of stigma in the sports world then when it comes to this topic?
To me, and I guess because I talk about this all the time and I specifically work with athletes who have it, it feels like no. It does feel like, though, it's almost like ADHD is the acceptable face of struggles in this world. So it's like, maybe because so many athletes are now talking about it. So Lucy Bronze talking a couple of weeks ago, I love it when I see athletes talking about their neurodivergence, because it opens doors to other people going, oh, and you can still achieve these amazing things. And it makes life harder, but it doesn't have to make it impossible to do these things. So I really, really love seeing that. And it does feel like so many people now are talking about it, that it's it is starting to become much more accepted as a difference.
I love that.
There are mental health conditions, and I wouldn't say autism or ADHD are mental health conditions. I would just say they're a brain difference. There are some mental health conditions that people are still probably quite scared of or don't understand how they work. So bipolar might be that, psychosis, depression and anxiety, which obviously show up much more if you have a neurodivergence because you're having to struggle in a world that's not designed with your brain in mind. Those bits, I think, can scare some people and make them feel uncomfortable because they don't know how to help you in the best way and they're terrified of saying the wrong thing. And so I think some discomfort can come up there. But it definitely feels like there is a change in how we see people with all our differences.
Right. What do you, in your opinion, I know you spoke about some of them, but what are the biggest strengths that come from having ADHD as an athlete, would you say?
Pattern making is talked about a lot, really being able to see a game and how it's going to kind of play out in front of you. That seemed really powerful. And that's what athletes say. They hate joystick coaching. So when a coach is standing on the edge of a pitch, say, and shouting at them, like, how confusing is that? It's like, I can see what's going on over here. I know what I'm doing. And yet over here, you're just totally distracting me by yelling in my ear. So that pattern bit is really important. Creativity, having fun, risk taking. So a lot of athletes will get too afraid to take risks. And that means you play boring and you get good, but you'll never get great. Whereas the risk taking means actually sometimes you can do amazing things. So that can be good. Hyper focus.
The risk can pay off.
Yes. But and maybe sometimes you push that risk taking too far, and that's when you're getting a red card or you're kicking a bench and you're getting suspended. But often it can be a real benefit to you. The hyper focus is phenomenal. If you love your sport, it's getting done. You're going to be putting in the practice and the training that's needed. And the hyperactivity. Like the rest of us are slouched off because we're exhausted and like, oh, I've done my exact hour and a half for the day. And someone with hyperactivity is still bouncing around and doing extra. So all of those elements can be very helpful to getting you really good in your sport. But the athletes I interviewed said they really, really never wanted me to talk about it as a superpower. They really disliked the superpower narrative because they thought that took away from the difficulties that came alongside it.
Yeah, 100%. That's why I always say strengths over superpower, because it is a hard one, especially when you're having a really tough day. And you know, and that's the thing. I think you've got two sides of the coin where you've got people that don't believe it even exists, and it's like, oh, you're just being lazy. And then you've got people that believe it exists, but they're like, oh, well, it makes you better at things. Why do you need help? So it's really hard, isn't it, to navigate that conversation, because I've found that hard with this podcast. I've always wanted to have a strength focused approach without, you know, not talking about the struggles, like the struggles to strength. Because I believe that if you have ADHD and you are aware that you have it or a diagnosis, if all we see, like I did when I got diagnosed, all I heard at first was what I couldn't do. Now, with a stronger negative bias and already not believing in yourself, what hope does it give you? So I really think we need to have that balanced conversation. Like, we need to appreciate that it is a struggle, but it doesn't mean we can't do great things. And I think that's what you're really putting across here with your book.
Well, I mean, I saw so when you get your diagnosis, obviously each place you get it from might do it a bit differently. But somebody showed me their assessment forms that they got back, and it was like, yes, you have ADHD, and here's 13 pages of all the ways you're going to struggle. Like, well, that's helpful.
It's like daunting. Plus, they're not going to read those 13 pages.
No, it's true. It needs to be an audio that,
yeah.
So, helpful is it for someone to go, look at all the ways that life's going to be really tricky for you? There was nothing on there about here are the strengths you have and how you can use more of them, or here are some things you're going to struggle with and here is how to try and handle that. Here's some scaffolding you could put in place. Here are some tools or some techniques or even some apps you could go to that might help to structure it differently. It was all just like, yeah, here's how your life's going to be hard. You're like, great.
Yeah, and that's it. What sort of hope is that? It's almost like you need that sentence that you said, and I said something similar. It's just like you are going to struggle. That's, accepting that, but it doesn't mean you can't do great things, because here's some ways that it might be showing up as a strength for you, and it's just a simple just reframe, isn't it? Just having a balanced approach to that diagnosis.
Yeah.
With that said, what changes would you like to see? I suppose starting with the sports world, is what if you could change one thing tomorrow for athletes of ADHD? What would it be?
It would be that focusing on the strengths, but I would love coaches to say less. And I love coaches. Coaches are amazing. So valuable. That they're the person that's got your back, and they get to know you very, very well because they'll see you in your best and your very worst moments. But I think if coaches said less, what they do say would be more powerful, would have more impact, would actually be remembered, and it would allow the athletes to make better decisions on their own. They'd have more of that autonomy. And I think that would be really helpful for athletes. When I did this coaching conference, we had an athlete called Kirsty Brown there who's doing her PhD in this area. And she said one of the things that she would find most helpful, she also has ADHD and autism. She said one of the things she would find most helpful is for more people to pick their battles. So as I said earlier about coaches, well, how am I supposed to tell somebody off? It's like, why tell them off? Like, why get annoyed if somebody wanders off whilst you're trying to do a team talk? Just give them a buddy that can give them the information later on. Why get upset if somebody's fiddling with some of the cones whilst you're trying to talk to them? If that helps them listen, let them.
Yes, it's so great. And it's so weird because as a coach, an ADHD coach, we are trained to say less. Like 80% of my conversation should be the client, right? We ask the questions, but we are, that's a sign that you're coaching well and giving space. And I think with ADHD, it's really, really important because a lot of clients that come to me at first, they will say, oh, can you tell me what to do? And I say, you say that, but even if I told you what to do, you have something called demand avoidance. And even if you do it for a little bit to people please, you're probably not going to continue with it. But not only that, I think it really gives them space. If you ask the right questions and give space, it's quite empowering because they know that they've come up with whatever it is that, they're trying to figure out. Because deep down, I believe we all really know what's good for us and what can work for us. If asked the right questions. And I think it gives the confidence then, doesn't it? Because they leave there thinking, wow, that's actually a positive emotion to anchor instead of one of those negative emotions that maybe we've been told what to do and what not to do. And then step forward without that, again, like empowering and confidence in ourselves that we can do it. What would you like to change for, because as we spoke about at the beginning, I'm on a massive mission for this, is I really want sports and exercise. I really would love it to be prescriptions for ADHD, because I know that yoga is prescribed for mental health already. I know there is a way to have, yoga in the NHS. What would you like to change for schools in terms of sport for individuals of ADHD if you could change it tomorrow?
My big thing is for teachers not to take away playtime. So it infuriates me when I have kids I work with who've messed about in class, usually because they're bored, and what's being taught isn't pricking their interest. So they're messing about. So what does the teacher do? They take away their playtime. So that means the kid doesn't get any dopamine from running around and moving and being able to emotionally regulate during break time. And it means the teacher has then got back after break time a kid that's totally emotionally dysregulated and wound up and desperate for some dopamine, which is a recipe for disaster. So I would absolutely say the worst thing teachers can do is restrict movement for children in school. So my daughter's in year 3. Her teacher is awesome. If she can see that the class isn't really with it and they're losing interest, she gets one of them to pick a song. They play the song and they will dance. Then 5 minutes later, they get back to working. She's amazing. And there's another school near here in Twickenham where I heard about them having a climbing wall, and the teacher will put the answers up on different bits of the climbing wall and you climb up to go and point out the answer.
Like, my God, where are these schools?
amazing. But really thinking about it like that, of like, use the movement, you'll get so much more out of the kids in there. And I know it's hard
Exactly.
if you've got 30 kids in a class and you've got some of them that have special educational needs, and it's difficult. But the worst thing they can do is take kids' playtime and movement time away, because that's when they're going to regulate. And so the more you're thinking about how do we weave in extra opportunities to move, the better. There's another school near here actually
Yes.
where they don't have a day-to-day uniform, they just have sports kit. And kids wear sports kit, and it's a high school.
Oh my God, I need to go to this school. Where are you?
West London. It's a very expensive high school, to be fair. But what a brilliant way of saying, like, we are making it easy to move, because you're in gym kit every day.
Why is it bad to move? It's so frustrating to me.
Yeah, no one wants to be in a shirt and tie and stuck sitting still, so that even when you go out at break, you can't move around properly. Like, if we celebrate moving more all of the time, that helps someone with ADHD, but it helps the rest of us too.
Yes, exactly. And because I'm always shouting about these units, they're called, I think, aren't they? They get put in units. A lot of my clients are like, I'm back in this unit and I've got to sit down, and I'm like, oh my God, it's not the worst thing you can do. Like, let them go and do, like you say, move around or be creative, do whatever it is, have another area for people that might be, more hands-on, for example.
We used to talk about, you grow out of ADHD. And
Yeah.
it's like, and I did see this meme that made me giggle no end. My husband has ADHD, which is why I can laugh about this. That said, you don't grow out of ADHD, you just get a wife or a secretary, and they
Yeah.
scaffold your entire life for you. And I was like, yes. But
Yeah.
also, I think people find the job that works for them. And you find a role where you do get to move a lot more, and you do get to use your creativity or your strengths or your skills, which is why we see so many professional athletes. We see so many in broadcasting. You see so many in kind of the real artistic, creative industries, in acting, in even things like architecture, where that pattern making can be your real strength. So it's not that you grow
Yeah.
out of it, it's just you develop ways to manage it really well.
Yeah, or you mask and then become really unhappy in what you're doing, and that's the bit we don't want, isn't it? We want that transition, because I felt so painful to find what it is I wanted to do and feel the confidence to do it. I think we just want that a bit earlier for some people, like to know that, like, just look for something else. Something you said that I've just thought of, like, in my head as well, the change of clothes is so important, because we struggle with transitions, and I know if I don't put gym gear back on halfway through the day, now I've been gym, that I probably won't go for a walk. So even in my head, every day I have all intentions of wearing something else. I'm like, just put something else on. I'm like, well, no, because you'll never walk, because you won't get changed and you won't get, do you know what I mean? So it's those little things as well that, like, get them out moving as quickly as possible so they don't have to think about too many steps.
Yeah. So we would like people to have as fewer choice points as possible, because if something is habitual, you'll just get on and do it. When there is a choice point to be made, it is much harder. We tend to go with the things that are easy to do rather than the things we know we ought to do, or that are going to longer term make life better for us, particularly if you've got things like impulsivity within your kind of characteristics. So ideally, pre-deciding things in advance is really, really helpful. Putting stuff in a diary so that it's kind of pre-arranged, that I do this. Body doubling, so you do stuff at the same time.
Yeah. So important. And do you know what? It's so true, because, like, when it gets to a weekend, I haven't got my routine's a little bit different lately because the gym opens later now. And I can tell you that I have struggled big time just because I'm deciding what to do. And I'm like, and then it just completely messes up my whole day, just having to use my energy to decide should I do that thing or should I not do that thing?
Yeah.
Whereas I just like to just know what I'm doing, and then I'm happy. Do you know what I mean? So systems versus habits, isn't it? They say as well.
Yeah. I mean, one of the best things to come out of lockdown for me was that you had to book in at the gym to go swimming. So if I had all day to go swimming, not happening. I'd have the swimsuit on under my clothes, but I'd never actually go swimming. Because at the time I didn't really enjoy swimming. Whereas now, because they still kept it and you still have to book in what time you're going, I go because it's in my diary and it's like, oh, it's now swim time. So as much as possible to take away any options of, like, this is how I want my day to span out. I'm putting it in my diary. Ideally, you're booking in. Because at my gym, if you don't show up to a class 3 times in a row, you have your ability to book classes taken away. The amount of 6:30 swim sessions I have been to, because otherwise I'm going to get a nasty little email and might get banned from booking anything, it really makes a difference. If you can think about where are the barriers, where does your ADHD hinder you? And then some specific systems, ideally to become habits over time.
So it's reminding me of what I did when I first started the morning routine, which was I slept in my gym gear for I think it was like the first 2 months when I started a morning routine 10 years ago, and I'm still doing it now, just so I get up early. And I thought, and I had no idea I had ADHD then. And I was like, I don't care. I'm going to sleep in my gym gear, and it's going to be the one thing. I just have to roll out of bed and get on my yoga mat, and that's it. And it actually works. Like,
really interestingly, the latest research suggests it takes 66 days to make a habit. And you're saying you did it for 2 months there. So bang on. Yeah.
Any last words to an athlete, or, you know, maybe a younger athlete as well, who is struggling with their ADHD right now?
Yeah, there was a quote that someone gave me when I wrote the book that said the benefit of their diagnosis was that they realized they weren't a broken horse, they were a zebra. And I loved that. Just loved it, from that idea that there's something going from an idea there's something wrong or they're shameful about the way that you are, to going, oh, I'm just different. And that's okay. Another athlete said, I asked why they went to get a diagnosis, and they said, I couldn't work out why I was playing life in hard mode. And they were a gamer, so they could kind of go, life? Yeah, life was in hard mode, and I wanted to know why. And so if life is in hard mode for you, getting your diagnosis can just make you realize your brain isn't broken, it's just different.
It just allows you to let go of that narrative that it's, you know, you're doing something wrong, and actually focus on what's important. Because it is a distraction when you don't know, I think. I really think, like, not knowing you've got ADHD just becomes even more of a distraction because you're just in this negative story about yourself.
But I would also say some of the athletes said it was very hard to get away from that negative narrative. So they were so used to failing and so used to thinking about themselves badly that when they got diagnosed and they learned strategies, and some of them got medication, and they started doing well and winning things, it felt like they were almost trying to unite 2 parts of a personality. And that felt very difficult. And it took a long time to change that narrative that you've grown up with of, like, I'm someone that struggles. I'm someone that can't do this. I'm someone that's never going to win. That's very hard when you become someone different. And so if that's you, I would just say, take it really easy on yourself. That whole process of reintegrating that knowledge about who you actually are can take a lot longer than we might imagine.
So thank you so much. You are actually truly amazing, and I've really enjoyed this conversation so much. Thank you for writing this amazing book. And where can people find you? What have you got coming up next? Tell everyone about your amazing work.
So I have a website called performanceinmind.co.uk. And on there's lots of stuff, articles I've written. There's a section called Performance Zone. And on there, you will find all the references for the book, because I didn't want to make it academic-y and like difficult to read. But if there are people that want to understand more about the studies behind them, you can go onto my website, Performance Zone, and there's a section on ADHD, and that will specifically let you link directly to the articles. So if this is your hyperfocus and you want to understand more, you can absolutely go and do that. Otherwise, all good bookshops. It's called ADHD and Sport, Strategies for Success.
Thank you so much for joining me on the ADHD Untangled podcast. I hope that these episodes are inspiring you to step forward with confidence despite the struggles that you face with ADHD. If you want to find out more about ADHD coaching, retreats, trainings, then check out my Instagram, ADHD_Untangled, or my website, untangledco.com. Let's get untangled and show the world what we are made of.